Hi, everyone. My name is Shelby Chaney, and I have the opportunity to lead this educator PD today. Before we begin, I'm just going to start with a little bit about myself so that you know who the speaker is. So I have a background in international studies and Spanish from the University of Michigan, as well as a social work degree from the University of Chicago. And I love to use both of these in conjunction with each other in order to provide a really well-rounded view of what does it mean when we work with youth. Sometimes people, they ask, I just don't know what to do with young people today, but perhaps the answer is a little bit more simple than you would think. And so I have the pleasure of not only talking to you about some tips and tricks, but also to provide you with a digital toolkit, which you will receive access to. And we have an expert in the room who will quickly introduce herself. Parker, take it away.
Hey everyone, my name is Parker. I'm a former student. I used to run a BSU, and I'm just really honored to be here and give input on what I believe that mindful listening is. And I'm just really excited to be here with Shelby. And as she said, share a bit of my expertise. So thank y'all for having me.
Thanks so much, Parker. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen in a moment and just thank you for everyone as well, teachers, staff, admin, whatever your role is with youth, it's so key. I've been working with youth now for about 7 years in different capacities, all the way from third grade through high school, as well as college students that have just entered. And so it's really my pleasure to continue to do this work, to get to know youth and continuing to really just learn from them and learn with them. And so without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and we will go ahead and dive right into the content. And I would also like to say that you will be receiving access to everything that you see shared or mentioned. So please don't feel like, oh my gosh, this is so much information. I have to take every single note, because you will receive it later on for yourself. So to begin, this is the Mindful Practices Educator PD, and I'm coming to you from my LLC, Still We Rise. RISE stands for Reclaim Identity Through Solidarity and Empowerment, and that's truly what I believe. And that includes when we work with our youth, there has to be a solidarity there, and there always has to be an empowerment piece. And through that, we are able to relationship build and really see success in our schools, classrooms, and organizations. An overview of what I'll be covering: varying emotions. So there's been a lot happening in the world, right? And we are all experiencing recent events in different ways. So we're going to talk about that a little bit, as well as some generational differences. And there's a difference in impact and the way in which these things that are happening in the world can make us feel, as well as bias, what we carry with us when we enter into our work, youth empowerment and the foundations of it. What are the key things that we need when we think about youth voice and choice? And then last but certainly not least, Parker is going to be our youth speaker and going to talk about some things from her own perspective and experiences. And then to end, if you have questions, I will be sure to give my contact information so that you're able to reach out afterwards. Starting off, we're all experiencing the same recent events, but we are not all having the same experiences. I'm going to read that one again. We're all experiencing the same recent events, but we're not all having the same experiences. So when we think about the pandemic, when we think about recent unjust police killings and the things that are happening in the world to each and every one of us, sometimes it can be kind of hard not to forget, man, even though it's the same thing, that doesn't mean that I can assume that I know how someone else feels, whether that be a youth or a colleague or peer or anyone else above and in between. One thing that we have to keep in mind is to remember that though a community's trauma may be the same, each person has their own unique engagement with it. And so here are a few examples of that. The Adam Toledo case. Okay, we know the young person who was unjustly killed in Little Village. For those of you who work with Latina youth, and I use the term Latina as a gender neutral term that is also easy to pronounce in English and in Spanish, as opposed to the more commonly Latinx. And so if you work with schools that have Latina youth populations that are not Black, it's important to realize that this recent event, it could be one of the first times that they're thinking it could have been me. And when thinking about youth agency and thinking about how they may be processing certain things, it can be hard to know how to lead these conversations or when and when not to. So I do want to acknowledge, yes, the community has experienced unjust losses before. No, being killed by the police is not an only Black experience. And conversations of police violence, the thing is, they don't always accurately capture the reality. So what I'm saying is not that this is the first Latina youth that's been unjustly killed. What I am saying is that our students' engagement with it may come from a different place than other recent events, and it may hit at a different emotional level. So when we think about youth empowerment and we think about youth voice, what opportunities are we giving for this type of thing to be processed? And do we know how to process it even ourselves? There are Black youth that have been trying, on the flip side, to navigate police violence and trauma for years. And oftentimes it goes without seeing true solidarity from their peers, sometimes teachers, admin, and some things may start to arise, such as other feelings of like feeling over it. Why should I support you when you didn't support me? Or I'm tired of this. This is their community in reference to the Latina community. This has been happening to us the whole time, and not just by police, but also by Latina people. And so there's complexities when we think about race and recent events. And when we talk about empowerment, a part of that is allowing youth to just be honest and to give that space for those complex emotions to take up room and think about, well, how do we lead those conversations? So for the Latina youth that's asking, man, like this is the first time that I'm really feeling this. Maybe this is a time to provide space, whether it's in your classroom, outside of your classroom, a peace circle to really reflect on it and not just to pass it by. And for the Black youth that may be feeling over it, it might be a time to acknowledge, yeah, this is a lot. And you're really still asked to show up. And what does that look like? Now, not all youth will sympathize with the victims of police killings, and neither will all adults. And so another question that comes up is, how do we lead conversations regarding addressing fault? And so a tip for this as well, if a youth feels comfortable expressing that they take the side of the police, be sure not to shoot them down if that's not your opinion, but rather present other perspectives. One really key thing when it comes to working with youth is to make sure that we're not forcing our opinions on them, but simply presenting the facts. This is what it is. How do you feel about it? Asking open-ended questions, not questions like, why was this event wrong? Because that comes with the direct implication that you think it's wrong, and anyone in the room that thinks otherwise will no longer feel comfortable expressing it. I've worked with as young as sixth graders when talking about the criminalization of youth of color. And I've had sixth graders and eighth graders feel very comfortable in saying to me, I think it was their fault. They ran from the police, or they had a weapon, or they were in a gang. So I think it's their fault. And while it can sometimes be hard to hear if it's not your opinion, I'm always happy to create a space in which the controversial opinions are welcome. Because if they feel unwelcome, when do you have the opportunity to talk about it? The truth is, you don't. And so I'm going to pull away from this for a moment to share with you this little folder. This is what I will be sharing with you. And in this folder is where you will find the comprehensive slides that are already set with animations and everything for leading a conversation with youth or even adults on, well, what about placing the blame and how do we navigate it? It starts off with a disclaimer. No graphic images are used, but these conversations can sometimes be triggering. And so if a youth needs to step up, step back, step away, they're welcome to do so. It outlines what is criminalization and leads this through a conversation. It goes through different incidences that have occurred, beginning with Tamir Rice. And there are notes, as you can see at the bottom here, to help you guide and give in its presentation. There are different statistics that are included as well. The second incident is Toledo. What happened? What was the reality? What controversies surround this situation? Bringing in topics of adultism, more statistics, This is a really cool interactive map, actually, and the link is directly on the slide as well as in the notes. Then the presentation goes through why race cannot be ignored when we talk about these events. And it talks about the complexities of race and fear, and is this really something that happens to everyone or not? There are a couple clips from the movie, The Hate You Give. If you haven't seen it, the clips are self-explanatory enough. And if you have seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I made sure to time this slide as well. So the shooting itself, like when he's shot with the blood, you will not see it in case that's triggering for any youth. Then it goes into more statistics and then a third incident talking about adultification and how youth of color are adultified and what that means. And then there's a video that explains further adultification, especially when it comes to the adultification or the viewing of someone who is young as older than they are. And this video clip is really great to break it down for youth that may not be familiar with this term. And then it kind of gets into some harsh reality, okay? And then to wrap it up, I've included a 5-minute meditation video because topics such as this can be very difficult, not only to teach, but to listen to and to engage with. And so it ends in this way in order to kind of recenter. So again, there are notes included in this presentation. You have access in the folder, and I'm also happy to answer any other questions. I've done versions of this presentation with 6th graders, 8th graders, and high schoolers. And so you can pick and choose and kind of tailor what may or may not be right for the youth that you work with. So that's just a little free resource for you all. So now, yeah, life is a lot. We're gonna push pause and we're gonna transition into a topic of authenticity and trauma, okay? Youth and staff of color are experiencing trauma that, to be honest, their white counterparts will never understand, okay? So when we talk about being able to foster an educational space of authenticity and allowing youth to be themselves, that also means sometimes we have to understand we're not always going to like what they have to say, and that's okay. Because if a student comes to school to do nothing but agree, are they really learning? Are they learning how to challenge? Are they learning how to express? And sometimes authenticity and a youth showing up as their full self can feel threatening as far as power dynamics, but is it really threatening? Or are there just sometimes opinions that we might not all be on the same page with? And are there things that we can do and keep in mind in order to make the educational environment less traumatic? Some things we have to be aware of are, despite what's happening in the world, the expectation is still for people to fully show up to work and or school in the midst of collective grieving. When we think about the recent events that I just mentioned, think about how many times Black students have been a part of or seen or witnessed protests, have seen killings on TV, and then they're expected the next day, smile on the face, be energetic, be engaged. Are there things in our classes? Is there time that we can take to acknowledge those complex emotions? As adults, we ourselves are affected by different things that we feel, and we may not show up to work 100% each and every day. But as a youth, which we'll get into a little later as well, this can be seen as a threat to authority or as disrespect. And so one thing I would like to challenge us to do is to see the complex emotions and the way that youth are authentically showing up as opportunities to get to know them better, and to also understand how complex it can be to experience the world on a daily basis in the way it is. We also have to keep in mind that sometimes youth can be triggered by problematic statements from peers. There's a high school that I work at, in non-COVID world, when I'm roaming the halls. It's a predominantly Latina school. And I often just hear the N-word just flying back and forth through the hallways by non-Black students. Me as an adult, it's like, oh, it's jarring each time I hear it. Now picture a youth, a Black youth, now they have to hear this every day. They hear it 20 times on the way to class. Now they're irritated. They don't know if they can say something or not. I've spoken to youth and they're just like, sometimes I don't want to say something. I don't always want to have to be the person to explain. I don't always want to have to be the person to speak out. And so they're feeling this frustration, but they're also sitting in class and they're trying to pay attention. Meanwhile, they're hearing all of these things on a day-to-day basis. And that's something that as educators, we're not always aware of, and how that can impact the way in which a youth is able to show up a particular day or moment. Having to constantly do the work, which goes back to the idea of, are you being asked to over-explain? Are you a youth of color being called on for certain examples in the classroom? Are there certain things that we assume that they know or that they've been through?
May I add something?
Absolutely, go ahead, Parker.
Thank you. So this brings up a specific moment where I was personally triggered by something that happened. So one time, well, while like it was the day after Eric Gardner died, and everyone saw the video. And I'm really grateful for my school, because we were able to talk about it in our advisory, which is the group that we all come together in before class starts. And in advisory, there was a kid who said, "Oh, Eric Garner is so huge, like he's just so big," like, and it really just triggered me, because um when I thought about the Eric Garner situation, I thought about that being my father, because my father is so big, and that's what I thought about, like, and I was just like, I was triggered, and I didn't really understand. And so like it makes me emotional, but I ran away and I was just like, I need to be in the bathroom for now. And I was just crying. But something I really appreciated was my principal. She came to me and she like just gave me a hug. And even though she wasn't like Black, she understood, like, I don't understand what you're going through. I'm sorry, but you could take a break from class. So she actually gave me the opportunity to sit down and just like breathe and go through my emotions. And that's something I will always remember, because sometimes when people say things, they don't know what they're triggering in you, but it's still a trigger. And it meant a lot to me that my principal allowed me to take time away from class to collect myself, because sometimes carrying that baggage into class can be really hard, especially when you're just trying to learn and you might see that person again. And it's like, you don't want to like be aggressive toward them, because it's like, a lot of people are doing this out of ignorance because they don't really understand the impact of their words. So like, just, you know, just to share, that's a way that you can, support your students, like sometimes people might need a break. It doesn't have to be a whole class period. Offer them 10 minutes, 20 minutes, just to make sure that they feel seen. So yeah, that's just my piece.
Thank you so much for sharing. And you know already, but feel free to jump in at any other point that you would like to add. It's such an important thing to keep in mind, which I'll say now, we were gonna get to it later, but I'm gonna go with the flow kind of person, making the connections between our personal experiences and the way in which we interact with events. So exactly like Parker was saying, that particular event made her think of her father. Or for me, one that made me think of my own father was the George Floyd incident. So I lost my own father. And so something that made me very emotional was the fact that now his daughter lost him as a father, and making that connection, it impacted me on a deeper level than certain other things. Or Breonna Taylor. At the time, we were the same age. She was 26. She was supposed to turn 27 that year. I was 26. I was supposed to turn 27 that year. My birthday was in March. Her birthday was in March. And I got to turn 27 as a young Black woman, and she wasn't. And so things like that, those personal connections, it adds an even deeper level of complexity of how we're engaging with certain things. And we also have to think about the re-traumatizing. Anytime a person unexpectedly comes across a video or a photo online, And it needs to be stated that broadcasting the murders of Blacks and Latine people, this should not be normalized. This should not be something that you see when you go into social media. This is not something that, now I saw the video. Okay, so now I believe what happened. Oh, now that I see, okay, I see it wasn't his fault. Really think for a moment. What does that feel like? To constantly see images of people that look like you being killed and it being circulated just like any other social media post. It can be a really traumatic experience. And going back to authenticity, and we ask youth, be yourself, express yourself. Are we creating environments that allow, like what Parker expressed, that in that moment where me expressing myself means I need to step away from class. I can't be fully present in this moment. Are there things in place, or are we open to making sure that that's authenticity is also being accepted, and not just when students are gung-ho and showing up for class and participating? Because at the end of the day, just like us, they're full people with a full range of emotion and experiences. So now I would like you to take a moment, okay? Think back to when you were in middle school and high school. Think about what were your top 3 stressors, emotional triggers, fears, anxiety-provoking things, etc. I'm gonna pause for about 30 seconds because I really want you to think about this question. We're jumping in a time machine and we're going back. What were your top 3 stressors? So give me one moment as we think. Okay, so hopefully you thought of something. It usually doesn't take too much time to think about the horrors in middle school and high school. Maybe you thought about, that math class that was so hard, or, oh my God, did that boy check yes or no when I asked if he liked me? Or perhaps, you were really involved and it was about your schedule and classes and things of that nature. But what most of us wouldn't have thought of are dealing with the types of things that youth are today when it comes to, even technology differences. Okay, we didn't have to think about when and when not to be on phones because smartphones weren't really a thing for most of us. We didn't have to think about who is cyberbullying me. Maybe it happened, don't get me wrong, but not to the same degree. Everything wasn't recorded, everything wasn't documented and shared like that. Even me, I'm young, but high school was a decade ago. And think of all the technological differences that have happened since. Political differences, things such as the recent events, Dante Wright, Adam Toledo, the list goes on, which is extremely sad. We didn't have to worry about vlogging online or turning on the TV and seeing a young Black person who was killed by the police. Were these things happening? Absolutely. Were there cases? Absolutely. Not to say that we never experienced anything of that nature, but was it shown in the same way? Was it every other day that you're seeing it in your face? No. And because of that, a lot of us didn't have the same fear that youth have. For example, another predominantly Latina school that I work with Black students there. And they talk about the fact that they don't always feel safe in their community, or that even, just walking to school, they can feel profiled. And so sometimes beyond police, there's the added layer of what racial dynamics are being dealt with. And so now on the one hand, there's fear of police. On the other hand, there's fear of the place that's supposed to be your community. And so these are the types of stressors that our youth are dealing with. Political differences, the Trump era, we didn't live through a Trump era when we were in middle school and high school. Were there racists? Absolutely. There always have been. But was it in our face? No, it wasn't. Not in the same way, not within like the last 20 years. Now, if you've been teaching for a while, you might be like, nah, I dealt with a lot of stuff you don't even know, young blood. But for a lot of us, we didn't have to deal with that. I was talking to a senior who's going to be graduating soon, and she was mentioning why it's so important for her to go to an HBCU and the way in which all of these recent events and politics and et cetera have affected her. And in that moment, I realized if I had graduated, 2021 as opposed to 2011, would I have chosen a predominantly white institution like U of L? Maybe not. And so even just thinking again, like that decade difference and the mental shift that it can have. And then the pandemic. This goes back to what I said earlier. We're all experiencing the same recent events, but we're not all experiencing in the same way. Yes, we all had to quarantine. With some of us live alone, got tired of it. Some of us have families, got tired of it. But we don't know what it's like to go through high school from home. I know me, myself, I'm not someone who would thrive in a virtual learning environment. I'm just not. It's not my personality. I need very hands-on. I need engagement, or I will be distracted. I will get bored, will fall asleep. And now this is something that they're doing at this critical developmental stage in their life. And yes, we're all going through it, but we didn't have to go through it at that age when that one thing that you're looking forward to is, hey, but I get to see my homie, like some home sucks, or like, man, my mom is tripping, but hey, I get to go to school and I get to see my friends go to these clubs, participate in these activities, and now all of a sudden, boom, 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 they're all taken away. Or graduating high school, or not being able to go to a homecoming or a prom, and it sucks to be non-academic, because that's the facts. And so when we're working with our youth and we're getting frustrated in the virtual environment or in a hybrid environment, really think about what that would have been for you if you had to experience school in that way, because it can really help us to relate on a deeper level and to empathize and to really just show them, you know what? Yeah, I get it. I get that I don't get it in the same way as you. And I'm sorry, and I'm going to work with you to try to make it the best experience possible. So the pandemic, a new normal does not make it normal. That's the fact. Everybody, the new normal, the new normal. I don't care what anyone says. The fact that I'm recording this right now to give to you, and that you're going to be engaging with me through this lens, it's not normal. It's not the same. There's no, engagement at the same level. No matter how many times you log on, you turn on your camera, you sit at the desk, you see the picture of the students like, oh, not today, or the teacher that's like, oh my God, virtual school. We're all feeling it. And even though it's been over a year at this point, we know what life was like before. And so we can't assume that people have adjusted and that just because a certain amount of time has gone by, now it's normal. We also have to keep in mind that students have responsibilities beyond the classroom. There's a young lady in particular that's in my Black student group who almost every time that I meet with her, she's babysitting, whether it's siblings, babysitting for money because she needs the money or family needs the money. One time I had her speak at an event and she's like, I'm so sorry, but I couldn't get out of babysitting. I had to help out the family. So she's speaking at the event and she's also babysitting like an actual baby, maybe like one, pretty young. And so there were like distractions and back and forth. And I'm like, oh, it's fine, do what you have to do. We're gonna make it work. But also, we're thinking about virtual school and pay attention, or turn on your camera. Sometimes there's things going on behind the scenes that are beyond students' control, and we have to remember that. And it's not always an act of, oh, well, I don't want to turn on my camera, I don't want to be engaged. Sometimes there are just 30,000 things happening, whether it's emotionally, physically, or responsibilities around a household that a kid can't get out of because it's not their choice. And we have to keep that in mind. And so in addition to not being in person, Now we're factoring in home life while also trying to concentrate on classes. And it can be difficult depending on the living situations of our youth.
One thing I would like to add is I definitely could not do virtual school or virtual high school at that, because I personally saw school as such an escape for me, for like from what was going on in my house, because I constantly had responsibilities. I have two younger siblings, so I'm constantly watching them, and school was my opportunity to connect and have kind of like an oasis. Like, some people are like, oh, I hate school, and I was like, no, I love school, because it's really where I get to like express another side of myself that I wasn't able to do at home. So I can only imagine what like students and teachers are going through, because also home is kind of like a place where you get the work done, and sometimes leaving that environment gives you so much energy. And so yeah, this is definitely not normal, and I'm really glad to see some schools getting back to hybrid learning.
Thank you, Parker. And then I also want to end this slide, just remember different types of learners. Like we both said at this point, virtual school, not for us. Okay. I'm a visual, but I'm also a kinesthetic learner, a hands-on learner. Someone can show me something 20 times. Until I do it myself, it's not going to sink in. I actually recently had a training for a part-time thing that I'm doing. It was 3 days straight, 9 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. And the trainer was going through all of these examples and showing us all of these techniques. And then we would get like 5 minutes of practice, and I would be like, nope, I don't get it. I don't understand. It didn't click for me because I haven't had the opportunity to apply it yet. And this is someone I work with youth almost every single day. I'm not a teacher, but I'm an instructor. I create curriculum. I do things of this nature and work with instructors on tips and tricks on how to instruct, and then I'm sitting here struggling because we have different types of learners, audio, visual, kinesthetic, reading and writing. Are we providing different opportunities? Are we being creative? And this is in person and not in person, because sometimes in person can get rigorous and we do the same things. Are we targeting these different types of learners so that engagement can remain? Sometimes some students get it because of the way it's presented, and some students don't because it's just not the way that they learn, not because they don't want to learn, not because they're not trying. But for some, reading a text and writing about it won't do it. For me, some of the most memorable experiences were when I got to act things out, or like, oh, no, we're not just reading the play, but you have to pick a soliloquy and now you're going to do it. Those are the things that I remember, and those are the things that help me to really click, right? And so that's me. And there are a lot of students, they just need that variety as well in order to continue not only engagement, but for them to get it. And so just remembering there's different types of learners, and so we should be teaching in various ways. So moving forward, I would like to introduce this quote that I love by Zaretta Hammond. She is the author of Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. And she says, a student's different way of being or doing can be perceived as deviation from the norm, and therefore problematic if we don't recognize that it's just different. Look at me, okay? Bluish green hair, different kind of earrings. A lot of times I wear hoops, okay? Some people might perceive this as not professional. Certain spaces I may walk into and I may be looked at and assumed to be a certain type of way. Sometimes I'm perceived as younger than I am, and adults treat me disrespectfully. A couple years ago, I was leaving a high school, an adult said, you're not supposed to be doing that. I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Now you know that you're not supposed to be. And I'm like, I work here. He's like, oh, okay. And then I got the respect. Oh, now because the age is different, now I get the respect. And so students that look different students that talk differently, whether it's language, accent, and I'm including AAVE, African American Vernacular English, or BVE if you prefer Black Vernacular English, Ebonics, whatever you want to call it. It's perceived as deviation from the norm, and now it's a problem. Oh, because you wear big earrings, perhaps there are certain stereotypes because of different ways in which you interact or express yourself. And so we have to challenge ourselves to remember, even though some people may not always be reflective of the norm, which honestly, I hope not, because life would be pretty boring if everyone was normal. It's not problematic. People are just different and express themselves in different ways. And that's okay. And not only is it okay, it makes the classroom, school, and just life in general more interesting. And so when it comes to seeing these deviations, we have to keep in mind that there are biases at play. And there's a reason, even scientifically, why we see it this way. So I'm just going to briefly touch on and then in the folder that I mentioned to you, there is a document that goes more in depth with biases. There's video, there's your article, there are some reflection activities for you to do yourself to think about your own biases. So please don't get mad at me for doing a brief overview, because there are opportunities which you will receive to continue learning. So we're going to touch on confirmation bias, fundamental attribution error, which is a complicated name for a very simple term, overconfidence bias, self-serving bias, okay? And then implicit bias as well, which I forgot to add to the list. So implicit bias, this is probably the one we're most familiar with, all right? Laughing at an offensive joke without thinking about it, adjusting your posture, walking speed when you walk past a young male of a different race at night, treating male and female children differently. Implicit biases are the things that we do unconsciously. They may be, they're rooted in our different experiences and our different things that we think about people, but they're just these automatic things we do, like breathing. We're not thinking to ourselves, I'm adjusting my posture right now because there's a young male of color behind me and I'm afraid. We don't go through the whole thought process. It's just you adjust your posture, you start working faster. Why? Because implicit bias comes from our fight or our flight, okay? We're gonna fight or we're gonna flight. And then we can also even add freeze. And so implicit bias comes from way back when we needed to have these quick instincts to protect ourselves. So we don't think about it and we don't pause and go through these deeper thought processes, because it's necessary to, the brain is like, I need to protect you. What do I need to do to protect you? These are the things. This is why you walk faster. This is why you clutch your bag. And so the challenge is thinking about and making the connection to these actions. So our biases are essentially thinking shortcuts that we rely on, okay? This unconscious processing ability, and it handles about 99% of the information we process, which is crazy to me. So a lot of the things, most of the things that we do, we don't really analyze, they're automatic. And so the trick is pausing, and there's a video that goes pretty in detail about this in the digital folder that you will receive. Learning to pause and really think, why am I doing this? Why do I think this? I led a workshop and a Latina woman expressed to me that she has a fear of Black men and she knows that she shouldn't, but because of an experience where she was robbed by a Black man, she's having difficulty not thinking about that traumatic experience when she sees a Black man. So she knows, so this is the pausing part. She knows she shouldn't think this way, okay? But she knows why she is. And so it's necessary to pause to try to think about how to change it and to introduce, there are these two strategies, which I'm gonna mention as well, are in the packet. There's two things in order to help combat these, which are counter stereotypes of when we think of a stereotype, thinking about a counter stereotype, what goes against that? What proofs do we have that disproves that, start to change? And then as well as reducing subjectivity. So for example, Black women, natural hair, big earrings, sometimes associated with having an attitude. Okay, So sometimes people can associate things from the media and et cetera to that person. And so when we pause, we start to think, who is this person that's in front of me? What are they like as an individual? As opposed to, because they aesthetically appear this way, I assume that they're going to be like this. And those two strategies can help us to see people in a different way and help us to see our students in a different way. One of the schools I work at has some gang involved youth. And to be honest, it doesn't faze me. They're kids, you know? And this one youth, on a particular day, he was in class, he wasn't paying attention. I was extra classroom aide that day. And yeah, he was just very disengaged. And the teachers, kind of yelling, like, why aren't you doing this? Oh, you just don't want to do anything today. Oh, da, da, da. So I just sat next to him. I was just like, what's up? How's it going? You seem a little out of it. And then he told me about how he showed up to school that day. He was trying to be on it that day. And then the security guards decided to search his bags because they assumed that he was up to no good. And he's like, and I didn't do anything and I didn't have anything. And that's how his morning started. Then you got to go to class and act like nothing bad just happened to you. And then the teacher assumes that because you're quote unquote this type of person, you're disengaged just because you don't want to do work. And so when we pause, it kind of interrupts the implicit bias and allows us to see youth in a different way. Another bias that we can sometimes have, everyone can have this at different points in time. I think adults have it a lot. It's called overconfidence bias. Having an unrealistic view of yourself, abilities, actions, and judgments. So this is well, I would never, not in my classroom. I don't have that problem, but I can name some teachers who do. And thinking we have it all together, just like this pawn who sees itself as a queen. And that, no, I don't have biases. No, I treat all of my students the same. When the truth is, we all have things to work on. And one of the activities in the packet hopefully will help to reflect on some of those internal biases that we may or may not be aware of. Self-serving bias. This is, our successes are due to skill. Our failures are due to outside variables. So it's like, I can't do XYZ because of the curriculum. If they provided more opportunities, then I would have a more inclusive classroom environment. Okay, but when things go right, when grades are high, when people are getting along, it's because I'm a great teacher, I'm a great principal, I'm a great XYZ. But then on the flip side, oh shoot, things aren't going the way I want. And this is because of all these outside factors. And so the challenge then becomes to ask ourselves, what can we do? What did we possibly contribute to the lack of success? And are we deflecting it onto someone else? This is a big one that can show up in classrooms. Cross-cultural miscommunication and how it can impede relationship building. So in cross-cultural miscommunication, we have a tendency to assume that there are certain similarities between us and another person. There are language differences that we don't always take into account. And this can be language as far as a slang, all the way to literal language differences. There can be certain nonverbal misinterpretations, assuming that because a student did a certain thing, they meant this. I remember like it was yesterday. I was in the first grade. The teacher said something to me and I was a little confused and I just kind of like looked off to the side. I tend to I'm a look up when I'm thinking kind of person. And then she got really upset and it's like, well, why are you rolling your eyes at me? And I'm like, I'm not rolling my eyes at you. Yes, you are. You just did like this. No, I didn't. And so it becomes this back and forth because she feels disrespected. And I'm like, I'm just over here thinking, but I'm a first grader. I don't know how to explain this. I don't know how to advocate for myself. And so even little things like that could be interpreted as an attitude. Are they always attitude? Or is it just a facial expression or a body language misinterpretation? There can be preconceptions and stereotypes that we bring in to the classrooms. And then there can also be a tendency to evaluate others from our cultural point of understanding. So I have an example. And this example comes from the same book that I mentioned before, Zaretta Hammond's Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. So the example that she gives is if a student or if a teacher or adult, whoever wants to say to a youth, would you like to take a seat? And that youth says, no. A lot of adults be like, excuse me? I said, would you like to take a seat? And they're like, no. And so in some, ways that we interact, especially generationally, like you asked me a question. And so I answered, no. It's not a sign of disrespect. It's the way in which it was phrased. And because on the flip side, maybe that adult isn't thinking about the way that they phrased it and the way it could be interpreted, the answer is then perceived as disrespect, which was actually never intended by the youth. And so there are little things like this, certain expectations that we can have that are just different, person to person, culture to culture, neighborhood to neighborhood. Even when we think about respect, some of us may have come from a generation where you give respect to the older generation. If they're older than you, they automatically get your respect. A lot of youth coming up today, you earn respect. I don't care who you are. If you disrespect me, I disrespect you. Give me a reason to respect you. And that's a cultural difference, a generational difference. And so we have to think, how are we talking to them? Are we respecting them? And if the answer is no, should they be respecting us? Are we creating environments where they want to respect us because they see that we also respect the humanity in them? Food for thought. And I'm coming closer to the end, and we'll be transitioning to Parker shortly. I wanted to talk to you about building authentic relationships, okay? And here's some tips for that. It's less complicated than we think. Like I said earlier, part of it is seeing youth as whole people, full range of emotions, responsibilities, dreams, aspirations, fears, all of it. Challenging accepted ageism norms. When we began, I said, we have an expert in the room, Parker. I don't care how old she is. She has a certain set of experiences that makes her an expert in what she's about to talk about. I was in a space recently where someone, a middle-aged white person goes, do you have a bachelor's degree? And I said, well, actually, I have a master's. But I think that was her way of like, how old are you? Like, why are you here? What gives you the right to, say or engage or do these things? And it was almost as though I had to validate myself. And so even as adults, sometimes we find ourselves encountering ageism. Or because a youth is young, we don't give them the opportunity to really speak up, to advocate. Oh, because they just don't get it. A lot of youth have gone through so many things. So many have gone through so much more than I've experienced. And it's not about age, it's about their own life, their own family, and who they are and what they've experienced to become that way. And it doesn't matter how young they are. It could be a third grader. It could be a high schooler, it could be a college student. Everyone has different lived experiences, and we have to keep in mind that just because we may be older, it doesn't mean we always know best. And then this is just a definition to really hone it in. Ageism, being an unfair prejudice or discrimination on the grounds of a person's age. And again, there is that video in the PowerPoint slide deck, which is in the folder under the criminalization of youth of color. Getting to know youth through your own interactions and not through the stories of others. Have you ever, had like a bunch of siblings, or whether you were a student or from a teacher or staff or et cetera perspective, y'all remember be like, oh, you're such and such's sister. Oh, you're such and such's cousin or brother. And it's like the instructor is automatically thinking you're gonna be like them. Or maybe you used to act out and you used to, maybe talk a lot or not do your work. But now you're trying, and this year you're showing up and you're like, it's gonna be different. But everybody still treats you like you were before. And so it kind of feels like, well, what's the point? What's the point of being different? What's the point of trying? Everybody just expects me to be a certain way. And so it's challenging yourself to get to know someone through your own interactions with them. I had a third grader. I used to teach Spanish a couple times a week at elementary school. And my first day in the classroom, the teacher told me, oh, well, he has, what is it called? It's like over defiance disorder, something of that nature. I'm calling it wrong, apologies. But basically where you just disrespect authority is a watered down way of explaining what she was saying. And she's like, yeah, so he's not gonna listen, like don't expect much. She had him sitting at a desk by himself when all the other third graders had circle desks and had their little groups. And so I'm like, okay. And then I just kind of ignored what she had to say. Also, he was a Latino boy. And I was in a predominantly white school. She was a white teacher. And so me coming in as a person of color, I'm like, okay, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I appreciate you telling me this, but we'll see. And so I engaged him just like everyone else, asked him questions. When I saw him disengage, gave him leadership opportunities, whether it was just, passing out papers. When we did group work, I would make sure that I brought him to a table since he was always sitting by himself. When I tell you by the end of that year that I was teaching that class, he would raise his hand, he was engaged, he would volunteer. He was a completely different student with me than with his teacher because I refused to let her interaction with him influence how I saw him. And it made all the difference in the world. Us as adults showing strength through vulnerability. It's okay for youth to know we don't always have it together. It's okay for you to know that we make mistakes because it makes us more accessible. It makes us more human. It kind of takes away some of these levels of the hierarchy and allows them to just see us as people. And a lot of times when they see us that way, the respect comes, the relationship comes, and they want to get to know us because we're no longer just these perfect people who look like we have it all together. And now we're teaching because we have it all together. We're just people who are figuring it out along the way, just like they are. And it makes life feel a little bit more accessible and relatable. Being able to admit our mistakes, that's self-explanatory. I don't think I need to give examples. Listening to hear and not to respond. A lot of times we'll ask a youth, and I use like we in just the general we, something, they'll tell us, and we'll still assume, ill intent. Why are you late? Oh, because, don't give me your excuses. You just asked me why. Do you really want to hear? Or do you assume that it's because of some ill intent? Finding ways to show that we've heard them, right? Talking about their ideas, integrating their ideas into the classroom when we're able to. Even some of the things that I'm going over today with you, I talked through with a high schooler that I work with. And I was like, this is my adult perspective on how youth might feel about certain things. What do you think? Am I right? Am I wrong? Would you add? Would you take away? So I saw a youth perspective on some of these things because I am not a youth. So who am I to assume that I know best? And we had a conversation about it. And she really knows that I hear her and I value her opinion. And then seeing beyond test scores, this which connects to the first point, seeing youth as whole people. I tested horribly when I was in high school. I did okay in middle school, but for whatever reason, like standardized tests, especially like the ACT, horrible. I took it 3 times. My highest score was a 23. But on the flip side, I got really great grades. I was in so many extracurriculars, but the test, I couldn't get it. It just wasn't compatible with my type of learning and the way I express myself. And so just remembering too, those are not reflective of who our youth are. And that is deeper than that. Unrelated to this point, but another quick example I want to give before I transition to Parker is there was a 5th grader that I had, young Black girl, She had a very colorful personality, is how I put it. Okay. Sometimes she would talk when I wanted to talk. Sometimes she chose not to listen to directions that I would give. And so one day I pulled her aside and I said, you know what? I don't know if anyone ever told you this before, but you're a leader. She looks at me. I'm like, yeah, you're a leader. Because when you talk, people listen. When you start a conversation, people want to be a part of it. When you do certain things, people want to do them too. Yeah, you're a leader. Some people might think, oh, that's an attitude. But I see it as leadership. The rest of the time that I worked with that class, did her personality change? No. But now she started seeing herself as a leader too. And so instead of distracting or, talking to the students, she would be like, Miss Chaney is trying to get y'all attention, or she said we need to get in line. So, her personality is her personality. But she said, I'm going to start using it for my leadership skills. And it opened up a completely other door. And that might have been, I'm not sure, but could have been one of the first times. It wasn't, oh, you have an attitude, you're too loud, you need to pay attention, you need to this and that. But it's like, oh, I have power. And she started to use that power. And small things like that can make not only a difference in that kid's life, but in the entire classroom dynamic. So I hope that these tips and tricks have been helpful. Again, you will receive the digital folder as well as my contact information when you receive the folder. So if you have any questions about anything that I've gone over or what is in your folder, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. So with that, I would like to transition over to our other expert in the room, Parker. So go ahead and take it away.
Hey, I said, first of all, I would like to thank Shelby for her amazing presentation. I feel like you covered so many amazing topics that these educators and these people who work in schools will be very, very privileged to hear. And I really love the fact that you got some opinions from students. As for me, I'm just here to talk more about mindful listening. And Shelby, feel free to jump in whenever you feel like it. But you know, mindful listening to me is being present when someone else is in the room with you and you're speaking. I feel like sometimes because we're teachers and we're authority figures, we forget to be present while someone's speaking. Shelby was speaking about earlier, a student might come in and they're late and the teacher's like, why are you late? And they're like, I don't want excuses. Are you really taking the time to listen, or are you just taking the time to assert your dominance, assert your superiority over a student? And when you're mindful, you don't just see a student as a student, you see a student as a whole person. And that was so helpful to me, particularly because I was able to start a Black student union alongside so many amazing other students because a teacher was kind enough to listen to me when I spoke about feeling weird about not really having any celebrations for Black History Month. And the teacher really worked alongside me, and we created something beautiful alongside so many other students who contributed. And this was such a pivotal part of my life because I really learned some amazing leadership skills, and I was able to step out of my comfort zone and really show the world what I was passionate about. And it was about Black excellence, Black leadership. It was about just being confident as young Black people, because so many times we don't really understand the differences that, like we go through. Teachers don't really understand the differences that students go through. And for me, like, although I went to a predominantly like Black and Latinx school, what was really different for me was the fact that there was a lot of colorism. And a lot of the adults didn't really understand how much colorism affected Black and brown kids. And so although we were all, minoritized students, it was so important to have that group because there was a shared experience, and not just colorism. Another shared experience is just the Blackness. And we invited other students to come through as well. But it was just so important. It was so amazing because we talked about so many great things. And I just really look back at how much that has changed my life and how much that wouldn't have been possible if someone just took time to listen to me and hear me out. Um, so I just wanted to leave y'all with that piece and remind you that, you know, we all come from such different backgrounds, and so much of what we go through is informed by our childhood. And when you take the time to really sit with someone and understand, and I'm not going to trip, it's not easy, because that means that you have to put a lot of your ego aside. You have to put your guard down a little bit. So when and you don't know how that may be received, and it might not be received the best. But if we're really in this practice to make the world a better place, we have to realize that we have to grow alongside it. And the world is changing, and we can't just continue to do the same things that we did in 2010 or 2005, or the way you grew up, because the way you grew up is not how we grew up. And it's so important to humanize people, because you don't know what they're going through. And as I stated earlier, school has been such an escape for me. And it's been a way that I explored myself, and I couldn't have been there in a place of exploration if it wasn't for adults who saw my potential and saw me as a powerful young woman, instead of like a young girl who just wants to be the center of attention. It's like, no, I have a purpose for why I want to be the center of attention. And I just want to remind y'all that it's a process. Don't get so hard on yourself. You don't have to be perfect. Being a teacher is not perfect. It just means that you're an example of what a human is. You know what I mean? All you are is just like, an example. And you also teach students, you know what I mean? So while, like Shelby says, like, she learns from students well, and we learn from the teachers. So just remember, that when you walk into your class every day, that, there's so much that we come with, but there's also so much that other people bring. And age is not determinant of intelligence. And there's so many different type of intelligence. There's book smarts, there's street smarts, there's business smarts, there's so many different kinds. And so I just want to urge y'all to remember that we all are a well of knowledge, and that honoring what someone can be instead of what the school tells you a person is so important, because that's how we humanize other human beings, and that's how we empower people to create changes in their lives. I don't know if I would be as passionate about the things I'm passionate about if people didn't highlight, the fact that I was so good at it. And that's the amazing part of being an educator, and being someone who's just in the room with so many like people who are easily influenced. You have the potential to shape their lives forever. Like, sometimes we forget as adults how important our presence is. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes hearing good job is so important. Sometimes hearing I'm proud of you is so important, because sometimes we don't get that at home. You know what I mean? And for me, I didn't get that at home. My mother was always working, and I love her to death, but she wasn't able to be present because she was working for my survival. And so it was amazing to see when teachers would look at me as a person and be like, wow, I'm proud of this young girl. She's changed so much through the years. I want to provide her with leadership opportunities. Like, I want to like invest in her, like, this is where students come to invest in themselves. And so you want to make sure you're part of an ecosystem that really helps them become the best version of themselves. So I just really appreciate this workshop. And Shelby, please feel free to add what you need to add. But I just want to encourage people to sit a bit more with themselves, so they can be able to be present in the room with others. Because sometimes we forget, you know, especially since like a lot of schools, they're ran by white people. You know, we live in a like, um, how do I say this? We live in a majority, like a lot of the people in power that we see are white people. And so we have to realize sometimes when, you know, a white person does something to a student of color that's like, oh, be quiet, or you need to watch that attitude. You're kind of mirroring a certain power dynamic in real life. And students don't come to school to be re-triggered. You know, students go to school to learn more, to open their eyes. And, you know, we just want to be aware of ourselves when we step into a room. And that's kind of what that mindfulness is about. Like, you know, breathe if you have to between classes, you know, take a break, you know, really take care of yourself as an educator, because how can you take care of students if not? You know what I mean? So, you know, I'm just so grateful for all the educators I have had who have really helped make me into the person I am. And, you know, they're like my little parents who raised me, and I'm so grateful for it. But yeah, we all have to continue to grow as this world continues to grow. So I think it's just, we have to commit to the change that comes with being these people. And, you know, as you do it, others will pick it up. You know, energy is so transferable. You know, you could detect it like this. So make sure you're giving that positive energy, because if you give it, you receive it. You know, Shelby was able to give positive energy to that child, and that changed that child's whole perspective of what that Spanish class was. So that's it. Thank y'all so much for listening to me. Thank you, Shelby, for this amazing workshop. And I'm gonna hand it back to you for some closing remarks. Yeah, thank y'all.
Thank you so much for adding that perspective, Parker. And I hope that we're all able to really take it to heart and even, you know, rewind and re-listen if we need that added reminder. Because these are things that can be simple in theory, but in practice, it makes us kind of reflect on ourselves. And it's not
Yeah.
always something we're ready to do. And so that's why I'm going to give you a quick overview of some of the resources in the folder right now, just so you can kind of know what to expect. Because one moment, here we go. The document is this one here. It's called A Deeper Look at Biases. And so it takes you through a personal reflection activity, which will allow you to reflect on things like, well, where did you grow up? How were you taught to respond to emotions? What earned you praise? Um, List behaviors you believe every student should have and things of that nature, just to kind of start to reflect on where are we coming from when we work with youth. There's a second activity called Check Your Bias, which goes through which goes through another set of questions. Do I have a preference for lighter or darker skin on other people, on myself? Have I ever disliked someone because of their race or ethnicity? Have I ever felt endangered around someone because of their race or ethnicity? As well as other questions, which will kind of help us to start thinking about our own experiences and what we may bring into the classroom. So as I mentioned before, there's some strategies, right? And so this page 3 is called Confronting Our Biases. There's an article here which goes into what I mentioned previously. How do we do counter stereotypes? What is reducing subjectivity? And then there's also this link here, which I won't click because it'll change the page, that goes to a video for additional learning. It's only about 15 minutes long, and it goes more in depth on implicit bias, as well as examples and suggestions. And then this is the article in case you would prefer to just stay on this document and not open up the link that I have for you here, which talks about the counter narratives and counter stereotypes. So that's one of the documents. You'll receive a PDF version of the slides that were used. You'll receive an actual Google Slides presentation on the criminalization of youth of color, just so that if you decide to use it with your own youth, it's ready-made. It will be view only. So you'll make a copy of it or download it onto your computer, and then you can make whatever edits you like to personalize it. And then lastly, there's this activity entitled Exploring Identity. Again, this will be view only. And so basically what it does, and all the instructions are here, it goes through different questions that you go over with your youth to start to reflect on. And this is also a really great activity to do with adults, by the way. Things such as, what's the first thing you think about when you walk into a room of people that you know, that you don't know? What are you most proud of? What do you wish that you could change? And then there are different identity categories that are the answers: ability, disability, mental health, education, socioeconomic status, weight. And so it allows us to make connections to the identities that we carry and which identities we may be more aware of in certain situations. To adapt it to virtual, you can make a survey. I've uploaded these questions into Zoom surveys before when working with adults. I've uploaded them into a Google Forms so that youth can see the results in like the pie chart and the bar graphs and all of that. And then there are also instructions on how to do it if you are doing it in person. So those are just some of the resources so that we can continue this work and it doesn't end by just watching this. And that's all I have for you. And so thank you so much for sitting through this recording. And again, please feel free to reach out. You will receive my contact information. Thank you again, Parker, for everything that you had to add, as it was truly valuable. And on that note, this is the end of the Mindful Practices Educator PD, which was partnered with Shelby R.I.S.E. LLC. Thank you so much.